I spent years searching for answers, trying to make sense of who I was, why I was here, and what it meant to truly connect with God. I grew up with beliefs, traditions, and religious teachings that I accepted simply because they were all I knew. But deep inside, I was filled with questions. Not just theological ones, but personal ones about purpose, peace, truth, and direction. I would sit in religious gatherings, read books, and listen to sermons, but something was always missing. No matter how many voices I heard, none of them gave me the inner clarity I was desperately searching for. Life felt scattered, and so did my faith. There came a point when I was overwhelmed, not just with religion, but with life itself. I felt like I was chasing something I couldn't even define. I believed in God, yes, but I didn't know Him. Not in a way that made my heart feel at peace. That's when I did something different. I stopped listening to everyone else. I stopped arguing, debating, and trying to convince or be convinced. I sat alone, no preacher, no audience, just me, and a copy of the Qur'an. I didn't know what I was expecting when I opened its pages. Maybe a repeat of the same stories I'd heard before. Maybe words I couldn't relate to. But what happened was something I still struggled to put into words. As I read, I didn't feel like I was learning about some distant concept of God. I felt like God was speaking directly to me, not shouting, not pressuring, just speaking, calmly, clearly, powerfully. The words reached places in my heart I didn't even know were still open. The Qur'an didn't ask me to believe blindly. It asked me to reflect, to think, to observe the world, myself, and the signs around me. It gave me space to question, but it also gave me answers. With every verse, my confusion began to fade, not because everything suddenly became easy, but because everything finally made sense. Who God is, what He wants from me, why life has pain, why we're here, what it means to submit, not in weakness, but in peace. I realized that all those years I had been chasing peace outside of myself, when it had always been within reach. It just took one quiet moment with the Qur'an to finally hear what my soul had been waiting for. The first time I sat alone with the Qur'an, it felt different from anything I had experienced before. I wasn't reading it because someone told me to, and I wasn't trying to prove a point or search for mistakes. I just wanted to understand. I needed clarity. My heart was tired from the confusion that came from hearing too many voices, too many opinions, and too many interpretations of who God is and what He wants from us. I had always felt that belief in God should be something that brings peace, not confusion. But for a long time, all I felt was spiritual tension. I didn't know where I stood. And so, I opened the Qur'an not as a scholar, not as a critic, but simply as a seeker. The silence around me was powerful. There was no noise, no pressure, just me and the words. And as I began to read, something unexpected happened. It felt as though the book was speaking to me directly, as if it already knew what I was struggling with. The verses weren't just poetic or philosophical. They were clear, direct, and deeply personal. I came across passages that talked about the nature of God, about life and death, about purpose, about the heart, and about our constant search for truth. It was as if someone had taken all the scattered thoughts in my mind and arranged them into the very pages I was reading. One of the most striking things I noticed was the tone of the Qur'an. It wasn't trying to impress or entertain. It was inviting, questioning, challenging, and comforting all at once. It was full of reminders that God is near, that He hears every whisper, and that He knows what's in our hearts even when we don't. For the first time, I didn't feel like I needed someone else to explain God to me. The Qur'an was explaining Him in the most natural, truthful way. Not through stories of divine suffering or philosophical mysteries, but through clarity, mercy, and undeniable logic. That quiet moment with the Qur'an became a turning point. I realized I didn't need anything dramatic to find the truth. I just needed sincerity and silence. Because it was in that stillness that the words reached me, not just in my mind, but deep in my soul. As I continued reading the Qur'an, what struck me most was how effortlessly it made sense. It didn't try to overwhelm me, with complicated theology or force me into blind faith. Instead, it guided me gently, inviting me to think, to question, and to observe. The way it spoke about God was like nothing I had heard before. It described him as one, without partners, without confusion. A God who is near, not distant. A God who responds, not one who hides behind rituals or mystery. It wasn't just a belief system. It felt like a relationship, one built on clarity, sincerity, and reason. In the past, I struggled with the idea of who God was supposed to be. Sometimes he was described as loving, but seemed unjust. Other times, he was portrayed as distant and unreachable. My heart was never at ease. I felt like I was trying to believe in something that didn't quite fit. But the Qur'an didn't ask me to stretch my mind around ideas that made no sense. It gave me a God I could understand. Not because I could comprehend his full essence. No one can. But because the description was clear, pure, and consistent with everything I instinctively knew to be true. The verses about God's mercy, his justice, his knowledge, and his closeness brought a comfort I hadn't experienced before. There was no contradiction between God being loving and also holding us accountable. There was balance. The Qur'an painted a picture of God that matched the natural understanding my heart always carried, but never found expressed fully in any other place. It didn't confuse divinity with humanity. It didn't make me struggle to separate truth from metaphor. It spoke clearly, confidently, and compassionately. What amazed me even more was how the Qur'an never demanded blind submission. It repeatedly told me to reflect, to use my reason, to consider the signs around me. It gave evidence, examples, and a structure that made sense. It respected my mind as much as it reached for my heart. That balance was something I had never experienced before. In that moment, I realized that this wasn't just another religious text. It was the first time I felt like God was truly being introduced to me, directly, without confusion, and without anything in between. And that changed everything. The more time I spent with the Qur'an, the more I began to realize that it wasn't just answering questions about God. It was answering questions about a life. It felt like it knew exactly what I was going through, emotionally and mentally. It didn't just talk about heaven and hell or rituals and rules. It spoke about human emotions, the struggles of the heart, the whispers of doubt, the pain of loss, the weight of responsibility, and the hope that comes with turning back to the truth. I wasn't just reading a religious book. I was being taught how to live with meaning and peace. I had always assumed that religion was something to be practiced in places of worship or on special days, something reserved for specific moments of devotion. But the Qur'an pulled me into a completely different understanding. It made every part of life feel connected to God, from how I spoke to people, how I dealt with hardship, how I controlled my anger, how I handled money, to how I treated my family. It wasn't separating religion from daily life. It was making religion relevant to daily life. For the first time, I wasn't just believing in something. I was being shown how to live by it. One of the most surprising things was how the Qur'an described human nature. It acknowledged our weaknesses, our impatience, our pride, and our constant need for reminders. It didn't shame me. It understood me. It reminded me that struggling is part of being human, but returning to God is always open. That message of mercy wasn't hidden in complex language. It was right there, clear, repeated, and sincere. There were times while reading that I paused, not because I didn't understand, but because I understood it too well. The verses reflected the exact thoughts I had been hiding. The worries I couldn't express, the emptiness I felt inside, the desire to be seen and known by something greater than myself. It was all there, as if someone had written the book for me. And that's when I knew this wasn't just about finding a religion. It was about finding myself. The Qur'an was not trying to make me something I'm not. It was guiding me to become who I was always meant to be. It brought order to my chaos and meaning to my questions. There was something profoundly liberating about discovering that I didn't need a middleman to connect with God. I didn't need someone to interpret my prayers, forgive my sins, or validate my spiritual journey. The Qur'an made it beautifully clear. God is closer to us than we think. He hears every whisper, every fear, every hope. I didn't need to confess in a booth or speak through an authority figure. I could just speak. Wherever I was, however I was, that direct connection made me feel truly seen and truly heard for the first time in my life. Before, I always felt distant from God, not because I didn't believe, but because I didn't feel worthy. I was told that certain people had to pray on my behalf, or that only through others could I receive guidance. But the Qur'an taught me that guidance is already available. It's between you and your Creator, no permission needed. That changed everything for me. It shifted the way I approached prayer, the way I thought about repentance, and the way I understood mercy. It wasn't a system that locked me out. It was a door that had always been open. I just hadn't seen it before. This sense of spiritual independence didn't make me arrogant. It made me humble, because with it came accountability. I couldn't blame others for my spiritual state. I couldn't hide behind tradition or ritual. I had to be honest with myself and with God. That honesty was hard at first, but it was healing. For the first time, I wasn't performing faith. I was living it. I could ask questions directly, cry in private, and find strength in silence. No one else had to see it, approve of it, or guide it. It was mine, and it was real. The idea that I could pray anytime, anywhere, with no barrier, taught me something deeply personal, that God wasn't waiting for perfection. He was waiting for sincerity. And that's something I had never been told in such a clear, powerful way. The Qur'an didn't demand a performance. It called for the heart. That freedom of direct access to the divine broke every chain of confusion I had grown up with. It wasn't religion by inheritance anymore. It was belief by choice. And in that choice, I finally found peace. What truly set the Qur'an apart for me was its approach to truth. It didn't ask me to silence my doubts. It addressed them head on. It didn't demand blind submission. It invited me to observe, reflect, and verify. The more I read, the more I realized that this book wasn't afraid of questions. In fact, it welcomed them. It gave logical explanations for belief, challenged the reader to think deeply, and constantly pointed to signs within the self, in history, and in the universe. It wasn't just about feeling, it was about thinking. And that balance of intellect and spirit was exactly what I had been missing. Growing up, whenever I had hard questions about faith, about life, death, suffering, or even the nature of God, I was often told not to think too much, or that some things were just mysteries we had to accept. But the Qur'an didn't dismiss those questions. It answered them patiently and clearly. It didn't just say, believe. It said, reflect. It didn't say, don't ask. It said, have you not considered? That open invitation to think made me feel respected. Not like a follower in the dark, but a human being capable of reason and truth. The Qur'an also repeatedly warned against following tradition blindly. That hit me deeply. I had followed certain beliefs just because they were passed down, never daring to question them. But now, I was being shown that truth isn't inherited, it's discovered. And discovery requires honesty. That was the turning point. I had to admit to myself that some of the beliefs I had held didn't sit right, not because I didn't want to believe, but because they simply didn't make sense. The Qur'an gave me permission to let go of inherited confusion and replace it with clarity that came from sincere reflection. I began to feel a sense of ownership over my faith. It was no longer about what I was taught. It was about what I had come to know. Not just emotionally, but rationally. The Qur'an didn't overpower me, it empowered me. And in doing so, it rebuilt my faith from the ground up. Not with pressure, but with proof. Not with guilt, but with guidance. And in that process, I didn't just learn about Islam. I rediscovered God, and in a way that finally felt right. By the time I reached the end of the Qur'an, I realized that it hadn't just answered my questions. It had transformed my heart. The confusion I once carried wasn't just about theology or belief systems. It was deeper than that. I had been searching for a way to feel spiritually whole, for a sense of peace that stayed even when life got hard. And in the Qur'an, I found that peace, not in temporary emotions or dramatic spiritual highs, but in the quiet certainty that I had finally found the truth. It didn't promise me a life free from struggle, but it gave meaning to struggle. It didn't tell me I would never feel pain, but it taught me how to respond to pain with patience and trust. The Qur'an didn't give me escape, it gave me strength. It turned hardship into a path of growth, loss into a reason for reflection, and success into a test of humility. Everything that once felt random and painful now had purpose. Life wasn't meaningless anymore. And that shift changed not only how I viewed religion, it changed how I viewed everything. What was most powerful was how Islam, through the Qur'an, redefined worship for me. Worship wasn't limited to rituals or certain spaces. It became a way of life. Being kind, speaking truthfully, earning honestly, forgiving others, helping someone in need. All of it was worship. Every action had value if it was done with sincerity. That gave me a whole new sense of direction. I didn't have to wait for a religious moment to feel close to God. I could live in His remembrance every day, in every choice. The journey that started in silence, with me sitting alone, unsure and searching, ended in a connection I never thought was possible. I didn't just convert to a new religion. I found a new self, one that was grounded, purposeful, and at peace. Islam didn't ask me to abandon my heart or shut down my mind. It brought both together in perfect harmony. And now, every time I open the Qur'an, I don't feel like I'm reading a book. I feel like I'm coming home. My journey started with questions, confusion, and a deep desire to be close to God. I had tried to make sense of life through what I was taught, through inherited beliefs and familiar traditions, but nothing truly settled my heart. It wasn't until I sat alone with the Qur'an, free from noise, expectations, and fear, that everything began to change. In those quiet moments, I found a clarity that had escaped me for years. A voice that didn't demand perfection, but invited sincerity. A message that didn't confuse me with contradiction, but guided me with wisdom and truth. Islam didn't just give me answers. It gave me a way of life, a path that honored both the mind and the soul. It showed me a God who is one, who is near, who listens without intermediaries, and who calls every soul to Him with love and justice. I realized I didn't need to carry confusion anymore. I didn't need to force belief or ignore my questions. Everything I needed was right there, in the words of the Qur'an, in the simplicity of Islam, in the peace that came with submission to the truth. To anyone out there still searching, still carrying doubts, still trying to make sense of it all, know that you're not alone. But also know that sometimes the answers you're looking for don't come from the outside. They come when you sit in silence and open your heart to guidance. That's what happened to me, and it changed my life. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched your heart, inspired reflection, or opened a door to new thoughts, then I'm grateful. Whether you're just starting your journey or walking it already, I pray you find the peace, clarity, and connection that your soul has been seeking. Stay sincere, stay curious, and never stop asking, because the truth will always meet you halfway.